You have a very interesting uh, set of credentials, and we're very eager to talk with you today and delighted that you joined us.
Oh,
So
thank you. Thank you so much.
welcome to the Bridge Interview Series.
I
Uh,
really appreciate it.
Susan, maybe we can begin right at the beginning. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background and early years, and we'll go forward from there.
Yeah, I'm from Anaheim, California, and I grew up on Lullaby Lane, which is a tract of homes literally next door to Disneyland. So you
Uh,
imagine being a little kid, in the early 60s, right next door to Disneyland. That was back in the days when you could get into the park for 25 cents. If you were a little kid, you get in the park for 25 cents. You couldn't go on any of the rides. You had to pay extra money for tickets to go on the rides, but you could get into the park. So I think perhaps an early interest in engineering might have been fired up then because once you've run around the park, which was much smaller in those days, enough, you start to poke around, behind the shrubbery and things like that because you wonder, well, what is making Dumbo fly? And what is going on with Mr. Toad's Wild Ride? So yeah, I grew up in Anaheim, California, had a deep interest in music, zero interest in being a performer or player, a deep interest, however, in listening to music, which spawned a career.
yeah. Now, as I understand it, though, when you were very young, you actually dropped out of high school. Is that correct?
Yeah, I my mother died when I was young, well, 14, and I had three younger brothers, and we were just kind of adrift. My father remarried, and at that point, it seemed like in my household there was no money for college. It just that just wasn't going to happen, and the grand plan was that my brothers and I would get a job at a grocery store because they had a good
Yes.
union.
Yeah.
So it seemed like, the thing to do is just get married and start a domestic life. I dropped out of high school, got married at 17. And the good thing was it was a bad marriage. So I was able to get out when I was 21 years old, no children involved. I
Yeah.
got out at 21, moved not far away, 45 miles away to Hollywood, California, and began my career self-taught in basic electronics, buying the textbooks and studying electronics and principles of electroacoustics and magnetism and basic acoustic construction, all the stuff you would need in
Yeah.
order to have entree into the music business as an audio technician.
But there's a certain determination, though, in your history that intrigued me. You actually did go back and get your high school degree, right?
When I finally decided I wanted to change careers and become a scientist, the
Yeah.
first order of business was getting a GED.
Yeah.
So I studied for that. I was 44 years old, but I studied it and I aced it. I was up there in that old 99th percentile, which made me very proud. And once
Yeah.
I had that done, I could apply to college. And I chose the University of Minnesota. It was nearby at that time.
But to me, that's a very inspiring part of your journey. I mean, there's a certain amount of grit and determination involved in doing what you did. I mean, to go back and get that degree and make the transition from a sound engineer to an academic, that's a pretty laudable change of direction.
Oh, thank you. It's funny. We're all engineering types, and we recognize this that if you've got a certain engine under the hood, it's going to find a lot of satisfaction in solving problems. It's just what you do. It's the brain that you've got.
Mhm.
I enjoyed being in the music business, but I began to feel a tug toward exploring the natural world. And
Yeah.
if you want to do something badly enough, if you're motivated, you'll do it. So I wanted it very badly. I thought I would like it. Turns out I was right. I love it.
Yeah.
Mhm. I wonder if we could, so just, lingering a little longer here on these early career days for you, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about what got you interested in, sound engineering specifically. Was there any specific music you were listening to that got you fascinated by or fascinated in, the engineering aspects of music, or what kind of prompted you to go into sound engineering?
Well, I loved records like crazy, like a lot of kids do, just really crazy about music. But as I said a moment ago, I had no interest in writing it or performing it or singing it. That just didn't feel right. But I knew I wanted to be somewhere where records were being made and help midwife them into the world.
Mhm.
Uh, Back in those days, and it's kind of still the case now, but in the 70s, you didn't see women recording engineers or record producers. It was extremely rare. It just wasn't a place where women could be found in those technical roles then. But there was one thing I could do that I knew wouldn't be influenced by my gender, and that
Mhm.
is repairing the equipment. So becoming an audio technician and actually fixing, working on consoles and tape machines. And in those days, we did component level repair. It wasn't card swapping. You had the schematics and you traced down with your oscilloscope and your tools. You traced down the broken component and replaced it. That was that old school technical work that it turned out I had an aptitude for and I really enjoyed. So I got started as an audio technician repairing
Mhm.
equipment. I was working for Crosby, Stills and Nash in their recording studio about 5 years after I had started. I was up to speed. I was good. I'm being trained. I'm in Hollywood, so I'm being trained by the entertainment industry's best technicians, the
Mhm.
top of the
Yeah.
line folks. And I was good at my gig 5 years in. When I heard through the grapevine, Prince was looking for an audio technician. So he hired me to repair equipment for him in his home studio, but he straight away put me into the audio engineering chair, which was a dream come true. That's
Mhm.
where I would have preferred to be anyway, and he made that happen for me.
How did you happen, how did it happen that you became involved in the operations with Prince? How did you make that connection?
I was working for Crosby, Stills and Nash as their studio technician, and a friend of mine called. The friend was John Sacchetti. He was chief technician at a company called Westlake Audio, and he was a former boyfriend. And he said with his Boston accent, "Sue, your dream job is waiting for you. Sue, Prince is looking for a technician." John knew that I was a huge Prince fan, and Westlake Audio, the company John worked for, had received a notice from Prince's management that they wanted to hire someone who would leave Los Angeles and move out to Minnesota and be Prince's full-time technician. None of the techs at Westlake were going to take that job.
Yeah.
They're in part of Hollywood. They're not going to leave to go to Minnesota. For a relatively unknown artist, this is before Purple Rain.
Yeah.
But when John heard about that position, he called me and said, "That's your job. You talk to his management." And so I did, and they hired me, and off I went.
Mhm.
As his legend in music grew, his notoriety for a work ethic that was unbelievable also grew. Were you a part of all of that? You must have been.
I was a very exhausted part of that. Yeah. Well, Prince had, and we know this now from the study of the neurobiology of creativity. Prince is what we would label a hyper creative, which is
Mhm.
Yeah.
extremely rare. A hyper creative person has a couple of actually faulty breaks in a couple of circuits in the brain, breaks that normally inhibit our thought process so that we can choose one idea and then build our idea, move from art to craft. But folks who are hyper creative have kind of a fire hose of ideas. Their ideas just keep coming and coming and coming. They don't apply the normal breaks. So with Prince, because he didn't write music, if we had just finished a song, we would have been up for 20, 24 hours.
Yeah.
Uh, and yet, if we had just finished something and he's brushing his teeth, getting ready for bed, and he thinks of a new song, we're going to go around again. We're going to put up fresh tape and we're going to keep going. So
Yeah.
a 48-hour day was not uncommon. We worked at a frantic pace in the 80s when I was with him.
Mhm.
I like your analogy to a fire hose.
Yeah.
Turns out that at MIT, one of our presidents, Jerry Wiesner, once described MIT education as something like a drink from a fire hose, but you seem to have lived it in another genre.
Yeah. And by the way, congratulations to MIT. You just have two new Nobel laureates I saw in the paper the other day.
Yes, 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 yes. Thank you. um, you had this wonderful career. You worked with Prince, and then you went on to work with some other notable music legends. And then all of a sudden, you made a decision to leave music, at least recording music. What prompted your change?
There were a number of factors. Popular music is by, for, and about young people. It's
Mhm.
about flirting and it's about romance. Popular music, not classical and jazz, but the popular styles that I was working in. So I had reached a point in my mid 40s where I was less interested in listening to the music I was making. Like a lot of adults do, my taste had shifted to I was more interested in jazz and classical at that age. So it felt like, oh, I don't know, now I might be doing a disservice to my profession. The other factor was I began increasingly to feel that tug, curiosity about the natural world. You know, just plain old curiosity, which is what drives scientists anyway. It just seemed like it'd be kind of fun to learn about consciousness and other systems and how they work. And the more I thought about the idea, the more it started to seem like a really good idea. So then what needed to happen is if I was going to go to college for 8 straight years and get a PhD, I was going to need money. I need something to live off of. So I needed a hit record. And it happened. I said yes to Bare Naked Ladies in 1998 when they
Yeah,
asked me to work with them. They were a pop band,
yeah.
and I just happened to work with them at the right time that the stunt album we did together hit. And back in the late 90s, you'd get royalties
I
with
see.
the big royalties. Sorry, scientists, but
Yeah.
some of the monetary rewards go to other fields. Anyway, with a hit record, you'd get a six-figure royalty check, and 6 months later, you'd get another one. So that was crazy money back in those days. It would diminish, you know, with time, but it was enough money for me to live on while I did 4 years as an undergrad, dual major in psychology and neuroscience, and then went straight up north to McGill and got my PhD.
So
This is all super fascinating. And while we're on this period of your transition into academia, I'm wondering if you could kind of define for our readers, particularly ones who are not as familiar with your expertise, but like what is sound engineering? Like how would you kind of define that for somebody who doesn't really know what that means?
Great. The recording engineer on a record is analogous to a cinematographer on a film. So the record producer is responsible for the raw material, the melody, the lyrics. These are the songs we're going to be recording. The producer works with the artist to decide on the arrangement, the style, the tempo, the key, all that sort of thing. What the engineer does is transfer the acoustic signal that's being performed by the players, the vocalist, onto a storage medium. In my day, it was analog tape. Today, it's a hard drive. But the engineer is responsible for all the technical decisions on a record. You get those sounds, you capture them in a certain way, conforming to your sonic signature and what the artist wants. You get them into that storage medium, ensure that they come off of that storage medium, and blend those individual sound sources into a stereo record. It's the technical aspect of capturing and blending and preserving all these individual performance gestures.
Thank you.
What is, but I mean, sound engineering must then integrate with the stage production as well, right? You have performance people on stage performing, and how do you and it's perhaps recorded as a video. How do you integrate with the things that are going on stage and or is that not an issue?
It's it depends. Depends a lot on the genre of music. So, for example, the
Yeah,
marvelous Martha DeFrancisco at McGill University is an expert in orchestral recording. So,
yeah,
Martha's job is to choose and position microphones in such a way, both on the stage and in the audience, that she captures the sound of an orchestra, so
yeah.
that people who listen to those recordings can imagine that they're right there in the concert hall, hearing what actually happened on the stage in front of them. Same thing with jazz. If you're capturing a jazz trio or jazz combo, those listeners want to be able to hear every instrument and to move their own internal spotlight of attention to whoever is soloing. But if you're working in pop styles, you may or may not capture a realistic performance.
Yeah.
Uh, you have the option today, especially, of creating records one instrument at a time using samples. Often, modern records today don't have any acoustic sources other than the vocal. It's
Yeah.
all just created in a laptop by combining samples. So the technique that a recording engineer will employ depends on the listener experience and the style of music. Who's your audience, and what sort of experience do you want them to have? And in this way, it's similar to film because some of our movies capture real human beings doing real things.
Yes.
Other movies involve dragons and, I don't know, zombies and things that don't actually exist. And then, of course, there are animated films. So it's the same thing in music as well. We span the gamut from realistic
Yeah.
documentations to
Yeah.
artificially constructed
The
pieces.
reason I ask is that last night, in preparation for our getting together today, I watched some of Purple Rain and I watched some of Bare Naked Ladies,
Yeah.
and the theater that's involved in those videos is really quite remarkable, and the coordination between the action in the video and the music
Yeah.
is absolutely fascinating. It just seems like such a wonderful marriage of technology and culture and human behavior. It's just wonderful to watch. So
There are an awful lot of concerns in the field of popular music, and some of them are extra musical, meaning things that have nothing to do with the music, the clothes that you wear, and how you appear on stage, and the fans that might be shown in an audience. All of these things, it's cult of personality.
yeah.
They contribute to the impression that the pop music listener is going to get.
Mhm.
So, but I mean, your work involved not just recordings, but also live performances. Is that right? Or am I?
Yes, as Prince's full-time employee, I did whatever he needed me to do. So when I first joined him, he had just started the pre-production for the Purple Rain movie. He
Mhm.
had already done some recording on the Purple Rain album, and one of the first things I was doing with a nice little Nagra stereo tape machine is providing playback on the film set, playback at the club, and all those music scenes needed an audio engineer to supply the
Yeah.
playback. So yeah, I did that. I went on tour with him. I did live sound at small clubs. I didn't do front of house at the big arena tours. That wasn't my level of expertise, but I definitely mixed sound for him in clubs, in the smaller clubs. I did live recordings with him in a mobile recording truck in some of our bigger cities like New York or LA. We have a
Yeah.
mobile recording truck there. Same thing on his movie sets. He liked to have a mobile recording truck on hand so that during the lunch break he could be recording. He recorded nonstop.
I have to say this is all super fascinating, and the way you speak about the work of a sound engineer, it really resonates with me. Just as a kind of side comment as an editor, because I think it- thinking about the experience of the listener and kind of ushering out this kind of cultural product into the world. Um, I think that, or like the relationship between like the sound engineer and the musician, and also like the editor and the writer. I think there are all these kinds of ways that like what you're saying is super exciting to me, from my perspective. But I also wonder, one question I have, just zooming out a little bit. Um, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about your relationship to like the concept of engineering. Like if you look back over your kind of career, like is this something that has been important to you, or that you've kind of identified with like as an engineer? And if so, like kind of in what ways? And like how would you say engineering has kind of been important for you like throughout your career?
It's so good. So, audio engineers have their own sonic signature. As I imagine all engineers have a certain signature. You're not merely trying to solve a mechanical problem. You're trying to outdo your competition and you're trying to get hired and you're trying to get gigs and you want to be the person who does your job well enough that someone says, yeah, I want you on my team. So audio engineering involves developing your ear. Now, when we're in the recording studio, the recording engineer has to keep a running stream of decision making. So, for example, there's piano on this record. Great. You don't just grab a pair of your favorite piano mics and mic up the piano. The first
Yeah.
thing you have to do is understand how is this piano going to be used? How is, because form must serve function, what is the function of piano on this record? Is the player just playing in the mid-range of the keys and doing a rhythmic part? Maybe it's salsa piano or something? Or is piano the main element on this record? Is this a piano ballad? So you will solve the problem of choosing the correct form to serve the function on the record, which means you'll employ your idea. Here's the cool part of what good is.
Mm.
What's a good piano sound? Should those mics be close? Should they be further away? A big sound, a constrained sound? That is fascinating to me as a neuroscientist because, as they say, categories don't exist in nature. They're driven by a praxis. An apple and an orange couldn't care less whether they were the same or different. We decide that an apple and an orange are different. And likewise, each engineer and record maker has an internalized psychological boundary between something that they would label good and something that they would label, oh, this will never work. So it's you're not solving a physics problem, you're solving an aesthetic problem. So there's no right answer. Um, to, so to answer your question, this is the exciting part, is the formation of your sonic signature based on all the music you've ever listened to in your life and your contribution as an engineer to not only facilitate the producer and the artist's vision, but to employ your sound so that you'll be hired again.
Mhm. Yeah, that's super fascinating.
So at present, then you are a professor in the um, departments of music production and engineering and in liberal arts at Berkeley. And you're teaching courses in subjects like music cognition, is that correct? Or is that
Uh, it's partially correct. I wrote a book that came out 2 years ago, so I'm semi-retired. I no longer teach at Berkeley on campus. I only teach for Berkeley Online. So I
yeah,
have been in the two
yeah,
departments. My home department was music production and engineering, and I
yes.
also taught music cognition and psychoacoustics. Now I'm out in Caro, New York, and I teach courses I've written for Berkeley Online, which are psychoacoustics, music cognition, and music and neuroscience.
So what does psychoacoustics mean? What does it mean to a layman?
Psychoacoustics is under the umbrella of the American Physics Association. It's the psychological correlate of acoustical phenomena. And what psychoacousticians study is how acoustic pressure waves are transduced into sound in the brain. It's the bottom up process. Music cognition is its companion. That's the top down process of memory and learning and performance and musical development, all that sort of thing. Music and neuroscience is exactly as it says. It's the infrastructure that supports thoughts and feelings and behaviors.
I see. I like the title of your book. It's this is what this is what it sounds like, and then subtitle, What the Music You Love Says About You. Now, I'm just curious. I'm going to ask Kyle what music he loves best, and maybe you can help us understand. Go ahead. Kyle, what do you like best?
Wow, I mean, I've been all over the place lately. A lot of, I mean, I've been listening to a lot of recent music. So, like Beyonce's recent album, Cowboy Carter, I listened to. Um, let's see, what else? If I had known you were going to ask this question, I would have prepared.
Oh, let me ask, when you were a teenager,
Hmm.
who'd you listen to when you were a teenager?
Yeah, I mean, my music taste, it's always been super, had such a like wide range in terms of like what I listen to. So I listened to everything from, still like the early Beyonce and Destiny's Child back then to kind of like indie rock music, like early electronic music I listened to. I listened to hip hop music as well, some kind of female singer-songwriter music. So I've always been pretty like all over the place in terms of the music I listen to.
Now, most of us are, and there's a good reason for that. We choose a given record at any given moment in time to satisfy a particular craving. Sometimes we're
Mhm.
craving a groove, sometimes we're craving lyrics, sometimes we're craving style or ideas, sometimes we're craving complexity, and other times we're craving simplicity, sometimes we're craving nostalgia. It's true that most of us who love music have a varied music palette in our personal libraries. For me personally, I've my home base is, as Prince would call it, is the rhythm. I'm primarily a rhythm-based listener. I also love innovation and I love complexity. Uh, Lyrics, I'm not much of a lyric listener. It's a little bit secondary to me, although I love good poetry. So if the lyricist is truly great, I'm I'm going to love their work.
Mhm.
But truly great, that's a pretty thin margin up there at the top.
Mhm.
Yeah, the things we're craving in our music reflects the most private aspect of ourself. Turns out,
Yeah.
when we're listening to music that we love, it activates a neural network that's responsible for our self-image and our self-awareness. So, listening to the music you love the most is activating a sense of you. And the marvelous thing about that is how private it is.
Mhm.
No one will ever be in our heads with us, ever. Even the person who knows us best will never be in here. So when we go into our private self and we have music as a companion, we feel very close to that music because it feels
Mhm.
like it's representing us in a very real sense.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in that way, I can see it listening to music. It sounds similar to the experience of reading, which is also a very private experience. Um, yeah, I mean, one thing I was going to ask you, Susan, is what you are listening to currently, whether it's music that has come out recently or just what you are listening to right now that you think is really interesting from
Uh,
your like perspective.
uh, I'm at an age where new music isn't compelling to me because there's so much old music that I love so much. So I'm delving a little bit more into things that I didn't listen to when I was young, namely classical. I started listening to jazz in my 30s, and I still love jazz very, very much. I'm trying a little bit to get acquainted with styles that I don't know too well. So listening to Latin jazz, listening to Eddie Palmieri, that's interesting to me. I'm also delving into the blues a little bit. So listening to more Muddy Waters and Willie Dixon and trying to get a little deeper into the blues, it feels right and I enjoy it. I'm much more inclined to listen to older artists than I am to listen to new artists. Occasionally, a Berkeley student will turn me on to a new artist whom I like and admire, but I still don't have the same urge to go explore their catalog and get into them. I prefer the music from my generation, as I think most of us do.
Yeah. I'm just curious, there's a lot of contemporary interest in artificial intelligence and generative AI, and in many respects that's a concern to the arts. My wife is a painter, she's concerned about it. I have friends who are writers who are concerned about it. What is your take on how will generative AI affect the music industry and people like yourself who've worked as sound engineers and production folks? What do you think the implications are from the point of view of generative AI?
Well, my knowledge of business and entrepreneurship is next to nothing, so I don't know how it will affect the business. As for how it will affect the art, there are serious concerns, of course. Um, when we listen to older performers, let's say an older Johnny Cash later in his life, for example,
Yeah. Yeah.
we're listening to a performer who's putting the weight of their life into their performance gestures and into the tone of voice.
Right.
Older performers make music in such a way that we listeners can recognize subtle aspects of tension and release and experience that affect their voice and their phrasing, their timing. Think of Frank Sinatra later in his life as well. Think of Ella Fitzgerald and all the real experts. So, what I'm trying to say is human beings recognize intentionality. The work of Ellen Winter at Boston University explores this in the visual arts. We recognize when someone tried to do that. And I doubt that that can be effectively modeled in artificial music performance generators.
Yeah.
To the extent that I know about it, I know something about it. The robots that have been developed to play music or to compose music are somewhat stilted sounding,
Yeah.
somewhat mechanical. I believe that the reason it sounds so formulaic and stilted, just like with, factory produced hotel art, shall we say, is we consumers can't recognize the weight of life behind the choices and the gestures.
No, I think that's a very telling answer, and I'm sympathetic to that. For example, in terms of the arts, my wife grew up on the edge of the steel mill in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and when that company decided to go out of business, she became very nostalgic. So she's painting. She arranged herself to have a 3-week tour of the steel mill before it closed, started being demolished.
That's great.
And she's been painting scenes of blast furnaces and what's interesting is that you can see the emotion that she felt in her paintings. And I think that's what you're touching on. I don't think a musician or a writer or a graphic artist or fine artist, I don't think you can reproduce that emotion. I have a hard time imagining how a machine could do that. I know people are trying and I know it may happen, but at
Yeah,
this stage,
let's acknowledge that there are mysteries in this world, and they say that the most complex thing in the known universe is the human brain. I'll give
yeah.
you an example. I have a colleague and friend. Her name is Diana Dabby, and she's an electronic music composer at Olin College of Engineering. And she's about my age, which is
Yeah.
late 60s. And Diana told me a story. When she was about 4 years old, the family was going to have pizza on a Sunday night. And little 4-year-old Diana didn't want pizza. But she was 4 years old and she couldn't articulate why she didn't want pizza. So she went to the piano and she started playing chords to demonstrate to mom and dad, here's how I feel about having pizza. I really don't want it. Now, for me personally, I'd much rather hear a music composition from Diana Dabby, who started at age 4 expressing herself with musical chords than I would from a pure algorithm that says, well, this is how music goes, so let's just do it that way. That human element has an element of mystery and unpredictability and error in it. And I like that error component in our creative
Yeah.
works.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you the same kind of question I addressed to Kyle in terms of his favorite music and get a reaction to my favorite music. I have very eclectic interests. I like Johnny Cash. I like Garth Brooks. I like the Village People, but I also like, Symphony Hall is just a few blocks from Berkeley. and I like symphonic music. Well, how could I be so distracted by all this stuff? I don't understand.
Right.
What does that tell you?
Now, this is the main thesis in the book I've written is that when we're craving music, we're craving a treat. And just like when we crave food, sometimes we want something that's salty and sometimes sweet. Sometimes you want a crunchy texture. Sometimes you want something smooth. Sometimes you want a full meal. Sometimes you want a snack. We
Yeah,
have varied result or varied
I love
palate when
that.
it comes
I
to our
love
food. And so we do with our music because
yeah,
we're craving different kinds of treats.
yeah,
No one music can satisfy everything any more than any one food or one fashion can. When we look into our closets, we've got formal wear, we've got dress wear, we've got sporting wear, we've got
yeah,
Saturday morning wear. We choose the form of an object to serve the function. Music performs so many functions in our lives that it should probably take on a number of forms in order to scratch those different
yeah.
itches or serve those different needs at different times.
Mhm.
I can say this because it's really fascinating. So I don't know if you know about this, but the study of personality is a really squishy topic because personality is very contextual. There aren't many reliable measures of personality, but there are a few that have good test retest validity. Anyway, there's a researcher named Adrian North who compared personality profiles, the good tests, with musical taste. And one of his interesting findings was there are two groups of people who have an almost identical personality profile, separated by age and musical taste. Those two groups of people with nearly identical profiles are young men who like heavy metal and
Yeah.
older men who like classical orchestral recordings. They're seeking the same treat. They're seeking high complexity. Some of that heavy metal and hardcore music is really complex. Many of
Yeah.
these pieces are 8 minutes long, both in the hardcore music and in the orchestral music. They want complexity. They want a challenge. They want to challenge their auditory working memory capacity. They're active listeners, not passive. They don't put music on in the background. They sit in front of the loudspeakers or they wear the headphones and they listen to it. So these two groups are separated by age and culture. North predicts that when these young men get older, they're going to be seeking out classical music. So we've all got the desire for certain kinds of foods and we have the desire for certain kinds of music. We know what we want to, we know the treat we're listening for, be it rhythm
Yeah.
or complexity or simplicity, and we
Yeah.
find appropriate music to deliver that treat to us. And that music can change throughout our lives. It's still delivering the same treat, however.
No, that's a very interesting response, and I appreciate it because I think I can sympathize with everything you've said. I understand my own emotions when it comes to music as well as food, and I think you've hit it. So it's
Yeah,
a great,
this is I mean this is mind-blowing. And I think that, I'm going to be reflecting on like your sort of analysis of both Ron and my kind of music tastes for a while, and I think our audience will as well. I guess a question to kind of um go a little bit like a step further. I mean, I'm wondering if and maybe this is something that you work on with your students or that you thought about with your book. But if you had to break down like what the important like takeaways are from this kind of like analysis for music listeners, like what would you say that is? Is it kind of a way to try to get people to reflect on their sort of mental health through music listening, or what are I guess like you know why do you think it's important that we have this sort of understanding of music and the way that you are teaching us to understand it?
Let me start with a caveat and speak to those folks out there who aren't particularly interested in music. Just like there are people who are not particularly interested in food or particularly interested in fashion, there's nothing wrong with them. So let's set those folks aside for just a moment. And now I'll speak to the people who truly do love music. When we fall in love with music, it's very much like falling in love with a person. We can never argue that our beloved is perfect because, realistically speaking, they're not. Every human has flaws and every piece of music has flaws. So the music we love cannot be argued to be better than music we don't like. Of course, there are objective standards that the musicologists talk about, but I'm talking about your personal relationship with music. So I would advise that what people do, if they really love music, is get to know your sweetheart.
Mm.
Listen to music, and rather than let your mind drift to yourself or your own autobiographical memories, actually focus on that music and ask yourself what you love best about it. Is it the rhythm? Is it the lyrics? Is it the performance style? Is it the complexity of the arrangement? Or, like for most people, is it the autobiographical memories? You and this music have been through a lot of things together, and it reminds you of certain people or places or events in your life that are important to you, just like your sweetheart might be important to you because you and your beloved have been through a lot together. So it is with music. When we activate that default network of our private personal self, we've got a little buddy in there. You've got that music in there with you. Of course, we bond to it. But just like if someone asked you, what color are your sweetheart's eyes? How tall is your sweetheart? How much does your sweetheart weigh? How much do you really know about them? What was the name of their elementary school? What was their mother's maiden name? Do the same thing with your music. Ask yourself, what is it about this music that makes this record, not that record, perfect for me? Why this record? If you'll let me go on just another moment more, I'd like to share with you a little poignant story. A couple of weeks ago, I was invited to do a record poll. And the people who invited me to join in this record poll, by the way, is where you sit around with a small group of people and you take turns playing a record for them that you love more than anything. And your job is you have to explain why you love this record. So anyway, in our record poll, there were some older people and some younger people. And the youngest was a young man who was very quiet and very shy. Now, this particular group of people belonged to a very strict religious order. Very strict, a monastery. But they're very lovely people, and they invited me, and we took our turns in our record poll, and there was this quiet young man that didn't say a word to anybody. It was finally his turn to play a record that he loved. When I say young man, I'm talking 20, 21 years old. Grew up in a monastery. And the record he chose to play was Whitney Houston's I Want to Dance with Somebody.
Mm.
And I thought to myself, I'll bet this kid wants to dance with somebody. I'll bet he does.
Yeah.
The lyrics, I want to dance with somebody. I want to feel the heat with somebody. This is a beautiful young man in a loving and beautiful environment. But playing, I want to dance with somebody, suggested to me that this record is meaningful to him because it's expressing an aspect of himself that maybe he'd really like to express. Why this record and not some other record? I didn't know him well enough to be able to ask that question, but I would advise people, if you're close to your friends, to your family, to your kids maybe, have a record pool with them. Get them to play a record and describe to you why they love it so much. And you're going to be seeing, just that they're going to slide open that little window. You're going to be seeing a glimpse of what they want, who they'd like to be on some level, some aspect of themselves that they don't express outwardly, but might be really feeling inwardly.
Well, all of what you've just said just reinforces my sense that music is not just a major part of our culture, but it's part of human emotion and human aspiration, and every characteristic of human beings finds its way into music. I know. There are times when I turn on music just because I need something calming,
Yeah.
to calm me down, and there are other times when I need it get energized. And it's really remarkable how we respond. And I guess is that music cognition in a sense, or how do you describe that?
It's very exciting. So you know that our nervous system has oscillations at multiple frequencies throughout the day and night. We've got our circadian rhythm, we've got the very, very slow rhythms, we've got the theta band of oscillations, which is around
Yeah.
4 hertz or so, and that helps regulate our speech patterns and a number of things. It's involved in dreaming and anyway, all sorts of things. When we listen to music, it's shown to amplify activity in the beta band of oscillations, which is roughly 15 to 30 hertz. That's our feel good band. When we've got the dominant activity in the beta band, it's when we're awake and moving, not too fast, not too much cognitive activity, not too much stress, not too much physical activity, but we're not sleepy either. So when we first wake up in the morning, we're in that lower frequency alpha oscillation rhythm. We're in an alpha state. We're feeling logy and slow. You put some music on and it can raise that dominant neural oscillation frequency to get you from that alpha band up to that beta band. Wakes you up in the morning. You feel good. When you're stressed and you need to calm down, the dominant frequency is faster. It's in that gamma band of oscillation. You got to bring it down, bring it down, bring it down. And listening to music can help diminish the amplitude of that gamma band frequency and raise the amplitude of that beta band neural oscillation so that your system gets into that feel good zone. Music is incredibly functional, not only for releasing memories, releasing buried emotions, but for simply regulating our nervous system and getting us to feel at our best.
I think I've got to get a copy of your book and read it carefully because I suspect that all of what you just said is somehow incorporated into that.
Ron, I
Me
gotta
too.
tell you that I love audio engineering. I loved making records. It
Yeah.
was the love of my life, but I felt like I would like the sciences, and it turns out that I was right. The same brain that contemplates the system that might be a tape machine or a console can also contemplate the system that is our nervous system and get intellectually very satisfied by understanding how these systems work and the great, great mysteries that remain to be explored.
I want to just return for a moment to one aspect of technology, I suppose, that was really monumental in terms of your career. And that was the production of or the evolution of the vault.
Yeah.
You did this at a time when we didn't have the electronics that we have today to record and save and archive what we're producing. What inspired you? What motivated you to create the vault for Prince's music? Because that was really a monumental decision.
So the answer is fear. So when I first joined Prince in 1983, I'm brand new. I moved from California to Minnesota. I know no one, and I'm his full-time engineer, his only engineer. I'm the person. And
Yeah.
sometimes late at night, he'd say, can you bring me the tape of Bambi or Baby or something like that? I don't know where this stuff is. I've only just joined. So the first order of business was to have all of his tapes cataloged and in a physical location where I could get him anything he asked for in the middle of the night. So that just started small enough, just gathering everything I could find that was his magnetic tapes, getting them all in a safe and secure location, and then having his office staff with an early PC computer come up with a database, come up with a way to store all these tapes. And I got kind of bold. I started calling studios where he had worked in Minneapolis and also out in California and asking them to go into their tape closet. The recording studios will hang on to the tape for you. I'd say, I'm Prince's engineer. Here's our FedEx number. Can you send us everything with his name on it? Send us all his tapes. And they would. And then I got even more bold and I started calling Warner Brothers Records, his label in Burbank. And I asked to speak to the tape vault there. Now, these are the people who legally own the master tapes until the artist has recouped their advance. And then after that, the ownership, in many cases, reverts to the artist. So I would call and ask the tape bank vault person, can you send me the stereo masters of these Prince
Yeah.
tapes? They didn't know. The guy working in the tape vault didn't know. He just knew the name Prince and FedEx number, so he'd sent it to me. So I began collecting all of Prince's tapes. As we designed and built Paisley Park Studios, the design incorporated an actual bank vault down in the basement, which is a big room with a big bank door on
Yeah.
it, foot thick with a round wheel
Yeah.
in front.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, that's where we put all of his tapes. When the 2008 Universal Music Group fire happened out in Southern California, there weren't any Prince tapes in there that got destroyed.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It was not only a good decision, but a monumental decision because you preserved a lot of history, which would have been lost. How do musicians handle this kind of issue today? What is the approach to managing
Uh, uh,
archive?
the musicians I know don't concern themselves, and even Prince didn't concern himself with the physical location of his tapes until we started a vault and he began to see this was his legacy. I don't know, of all the artists I've worked with in 22 years, I don't know a single one of them who was concerned with the location of their tapes. I mean, the ones the songs they were still going to work on, they knew where those were, but the older tapes, I don't know if they cared all that much. And bear in mind, tape is heavy. Those 2-inch 24-track reels of tape, they're pretty heavy. They take up a lot of space. So I think a lot of people just leave it in a studio, or they'll leave
Yeah.
it, they'll let the record label have it and not worry too much about it. With Prince, I worried about it. That's why I
Yeah.
said fear was my motivation. I just had to have everything. If he asked me for it, I needed to be able to get it.
Yeah, no, I think your approach is the right one. I agree with that.
Mm.
Susan, this has been a wonderful conversation, which I always promise our interview guests that we'll not go beyond an hour, and we're approaching an hour. And I want to thank you for this. It's been very informative, and it just reinforces how important music is in our world and culture. And today we need it more than any. I think the world today is pretty uh, pretty uncertain. And I think having some source of confidence in our musical bearings is important to us all. So I thank you for that. And I thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you very, very much. I would say that having a relationship with music is like having a relationship with yourself. Getting to know yourself and your deepest, most private, shall we say, desires and fantasies. The music I love is in large part made by people whose lives are very different than mine. I prefer R&B, soul music is the street I live on. I like funk music. Uh, Most of the music in my collection is made by male artists. I love many female artists, but the majority of it is made by men. And these are people whose lives aren't the same as mine. And yet, when I listen to that music that I love with all my heart, I must have something in common with them. I must, because that music just feels so right. This is why musical love can expand our minds and get us closer to a broader sense of self. All the various aspects of ourselves that we don't show on the outside, but that we sure as hell feel on the inside. This is good for us. This is
Yeah.
mentally, emotionally healthy.
I echo what Ron said. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been such a fascinating and just engaging and fun conversation. I think, well, from my perspective, one thing that I think is just really great about this conversation is that I think music, um, especially now, it can slide in and out of people's lives without them really thinking too much about it in a way that like a Netflix show might, or just these various kind of like um, elements of popular culture that kind of pop up. But I think, you are really enriching our understanding of music and encouraging us to be more thoughtful about it. And I think in turn, kind of enriching our understanding of ourselves as well. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you for saying so. I really appreciate it. And again, I am I feel tremendously flattered that you invited me to talk with this august group. In another lifetime, I would have loved to have joined you and been a member and done the kind of engineering that you all do. So it's great to talk to you.
Well, this has been our pleasure, I can tell you. Thank you so much. Your passion and devotion to music is inspiring, and it's something that we appreciate very much, Susan.